So welcome back. This is episode 6 of the Crushing Micros series. And today we're going to be discussing some basics of pre-flop play, specifically out of position from the small blind and big blind. So the first thing we're going to do is go over Andrew's homework from last episode, which is 3-betting in position. We're going to look at a bunch of hands he has selected and talk about them. And as far as what we're going to talk about, the new material is pretty much rule number 1 about out of position play is staying tight, and I'll go into what I mean by that. Then we're going to talk about a range for completing out of the small blind when you have a bunch of limpers, or even just one limper that are going to have position on you. We're going to talk about playing versus early position and late position raisers. It's a little bit different, and flat calling with hands like ace-jack offsuit to liberal stealers. So people that are raising the button with a really wide range, the merits of flat calling with a hand like ace-jack offsuit. And a little bit more about squeezing and 3-betting out of position, but the big caveat there is that you probably should not be getting very squeeze happy at the micros. It's while it's certainly important to recognize situations in which to do it, if you never squeeze, you could still be a huge winner. All right, so that's it, and let's move on to our next segment. All right, so here we are. We're looking at a session that Andrew played at 25 NL, where his goal was to get his 3-bet. I think, did we say over 7% or over 8%?
It was over 7.
Okay, and we were going to look at the general hands that you chose to 3-bet in position, along with the situations that you chose, and you're going to talk about some of those hands. So overall, I mean, it's a short sample size, but we figured it would be big enough for you to experience some of those spots where you're 3-betting light, possibly, and to just keep you focused. So if you're not used to doing it, there's no sense in doing it for a longer stretch, because your concentration will start fading. So
okay.
I see your one money when seeing flop is 53%, which is quite good when I guess for any micro stakes grinder. So what was your overall experience when having played this session?
Honestly, like I expected to be played back up a lot more. I mean, generally, I didn't feel like the table made any particular effort to adjust to me. The regulars seemed to just play their own game and just not battle with other regulars, which I think is probably a good strategy generally. However, I think this definitely would leave them open to being exploited by a person that 3-bets a lot. And I don't think the fish realized either way, so it didn't really matter.
Okay. And I actually think that that's going to be the case at the micro stakes, because once you get up to 100 and 200 NL, people are a lot more likely to want to play back at you. And of course, once you get up to the true mid stakes like 400 and 600 NL, there it's even more so. But I think at the micro stakes, a lot of the people are just content kind of playing their hands. So I would imagine just stepping up the aggression to just be profitable. Should we look at some of the hands that you played?
Sure. I picked 6 hands that I did that I 3-bet in. I just go to the filters and filter them in. Hold on. Okay.
Okay, so you just have a 3-bet pot there. Awesome.
Yeah. So I've got 9 hands in total. I mean, my total 3-bet percentage for the session was over 9%, right. And I've got 9 hands. And I guess we could just start right at the top.
And I see the one significant loss you had is a legitimate 3-betting hand.
Yeah. Surprisingly.
Ironically, yeah.
Yeah. It was a tricky spot. Anyway, hold on, let me bring it up. Okay. Is this it? No. Sorry, this is it. I've already got them all up actually. I don't know why I did that. Okay, so here there's been a poster out of position
Right.
under the gun. I'm on the button with 9-8 off. So there's dead money in the pot already. This player, Booby 1969, I actually think is a card runners member. I'm not sure though. I think I've seen his name around. Anyway, he's reasonably tight. He runs at 22-17. Well, on the stats I have for him, and I think he'd be isolating a lot here with quite a
Sure.
wide range. And then this Jeradim guy who's also posted who posted out of position. He
Right.
overcalls, and I have him running at 22-13, but clearly his range is weaker than a standard overcall
Yeah,
for him
and he
anyway.
posted out of position, so
And
he
so I
might
felt
feel like he wants to defend his post.
well, I definitely felt like in this spot I could put a lot of pressure on
Right.
Booby 69, and I felt he'd play honestly versus a 3-bet here, so I elected to do
It's a
that.
good bet size
So I
too.
did. Um, yeah, I wanted to make it a reasonable amount so that it's the simplest bet size I'd make with a big hand anyway, but just not too big to overly
Yeah, no, it's perfect.
float the
Yeah, I
pot,
was
but just
thinking like
enough to make it
380.
honest.
So this is very good.
So I do the blinds fold, and then our card runners member friend he folds too, and then this guy
Right.
calls again. Now I'm putting in on pocket pair, maybe like
Yeah,
a
that's
king
my
jack
thinking too.
type hand. Nothing very strong. Anyway, so the flop comes pretty great for me. So I elect to c bet about, I don't know, 2/3 pot, and he folds. So
Yeah, good bet size. I
game
would
is
have bet
over.
like 625, but I mean that's again essentially the same. There's really no reason to make it much more. Um, so
Yeah, I just felt either he'd be
yeah,
going with his hand or he wouldn't. I mean, once he puts any more money in past the flop, I've got to
right.
expect he's going with his hand, and obviously with mine, I'm not
And if
going
you had
any
an ace
further anyway.
here,
So,
that's about the
um,
amount that you should bet. So all right, good hand.
well, okay, that's hand one. I'll pull up hand two. Sorry, let me stop this. Um, hand. Nope, that's the one I've already done. Sorry. Okay. Uh, Here, we're effectively, I've got Queen Jack suited on the
Right.
button, and we're four-handed. Um, this Randy guy, he is playing reasonably tight, but I felt, I don't know, I wanted to test the table early in my session, so I just wanted to get a feel for how people would react to it. So I'm not sure whether actually calling here would be better, given the strength of my hand, but I felt I'd get a lot of folds here. He didn't seem
Now,
particularly
by
crazy or anything.
default, I definitely
But
like flat calling with a suited connector on the button.
mm,
But if your intention is to be testing the table and building an aggressive image, then I don't mind a 3-bet. But I would much rather
mm,
3-bet with something that plays a little bit less well post-flop than a queen jack suited. But for the purposes of
okay.
of this experiment, then I think this is fine.
Yeah, I did note actually that I thought maybe a call would be better because it plays better post flop. But yeah, I just wanted to see. Obviously, the goal of the
Right.
video was to just 3-bet, and
Sure.
I figured this was a decent spot, so I did. And he called. Um, the flop comes pretty fair for me. I mean, I'm not entirely sure what this player is calling 3-bets with anyway. But he seems pretty weak tight. Um, so I wasn't too sure about my hand right here. So he
Yeah, I
checked
really
me,
like
so
the
I
check
decided to
here.
check because obviously I want
Um,
showdown value.
you can represent. I think if I had air, I'm definitely betting here. But with some kind of showdown value, I'm more than happy to. I feel like it's a way ahead, way behind type situation, and I can induce bluffs on later streets. And there's just not much value in betting, I don't think.
Okay. Well, I
Right.
checked through. The turn came with 3. And then oh man, bet out $1
Right.
into a 635 pot. And I didn't really, I mean, I could definitely just cool down because I do feel like I have the best hand, but I just wanted to mix it up a little, and I figured I would make the same move with a set of queens or kings, which I could easily have after 3 betting. And
Yeah, I like that.
so I just decided to raise them up a little bit because I
Right.
definitely felt I had the best hand.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
And he
I
just
definitely like a
snap
raise there
folded.
too.
So
Because it charges for draws and it allows you to check it back on the river if the river doesn't come nice. Um, so yeah,
mm,
just a great spot to
a
reverse
reverse
block a
block
bet.
bet.
So that's the nice thing about being in position there.
Mm.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think you played
Well,
that
I guess we can
excellent
move on to the
on every
next one.
street.
It's my third hand. I had 6-8 suited. Um, oh, hold on a sec.
But
Sorry,
I mean, we can talk
didn't
about
have
that hand
6-8
too.
suited. That's a lie. Oh no, I think I'm losing it. No, here it is. Sorry, this is the hand I've got lined up. Okay, I've
Okay.
got queen 10 suited in the big blind. Um, okay, so the action goes. I mean, it's five-handed, so he's effectively in the cutoff. And Nuts Buster, um, he plays 23-12, and he's pretty aggressive. But I didn't feel this was a standard bet size for him. Standard would have been pot. So I don't really know what he's making a less than pot size bet with. I don't know, maybe he's taking into consideration it's short-handed, I'm not sure. Anyway, so he does, and then there's an
Right.
overcaller on the button from another reasonably tight player who's playing 26-11. And he's also very aggressive. So this guy's aggressive, the guy on the button's aggressive, and I feel like if he's got a big hand, he's definitely 3-betting. And I just thought this is a great spot
Yeah,
for
definitely.
a 3-bet
That would
bluff
make it something
squeeze.
like
Um,
350 or so,
and I felt Nuts Buster.
maybe a little bit
I
more.
felt like Nut Buster would yeah,
Now,
he'd
if there wasn't
he'd
an
play
overcall, I
honestly.
probably would have just folded my
Uh,
queen 10. But this is a good spot to squeeze. You're right.
mm. Well, I did. Maybe I should have made my bet a bit
Good.
bigger.
Yeah, aggressive player
I got
opens.
2 folds. And that was it.
Kind of a tighter player calls on the button. Good spot to squeeze. You've got a good hand to squeeze too.
Hmm.
It's going to play reasonably well post flop.
Yeah. Cool. I'm glad you agree. uh, Next one. Okay, let's do it like this. Okay. Here I'm on the button with 6-8 suited. It's effectively 5-way again. This dead end street guy opens the pot in the cutoff, and I have him running at 24-16, and he's a regular. He plays quite a lot of hands,
Yeah.
and he has an attempt to steal of 42%. So I feel like I feel like he's decent enough so that if I call, I'm not getting paid off that much when I even if I do hit. So I
Right.
feel like most of my value will come from 3-betting and taking it down here versus this player.
Good.
And so I did.
Now, what might go into
And
my
that's
decision
two
too
things.
is if the blinds are very bad, like if the blinds are just really, really loose, then I might be tempted to just call and see like a 3 or 4-way pot.
Right.
But I think by default, 3-betting there is fine. Well, not by default. Mixing it up between 3-betting and flat calling. But again, for the purposes of this, I think this was a good spot to 3-bet.
Okay. But if the player in the cutoff is a decent player, how do you feel about just flat calling? I mean, uh, just in a vacuum, if you knew that you'd be, if you could play this pot versus this player with this hand, how would you play this hand? I mean, is this the
I
kind
think
of hand that you'd still be flat calling with even
sometimes
against a
I think
decent
it
player?
depends on how
Or
how well they play post flop. I think that if they play really well post flop, then I think three betting it is better because we want to take it down pre flop. Um, if they're exploitable post flop, as in like they'll fire the flop and give up on the turn, then we can float them. Or if they just if they're just gonna play weak tight post flop, then it might be tempted to call. We're gonna get into a lot more post flop situations later, but this we can come back to this hand later on when I ask you to practice some floating, and in that case, when I do ask you to practice some floating, then this would be a great spot for you to call with the intention of floating. But again, for the purposes of this, I definitely think that versus this kind of a player who steals this much and plays this loose, it's a great spot to pick up the pot pre-flop and build your aggressive image, which is good too.
Okay, cool.
So I definitely think you played it well. I'm just also putting some other things out there.
Yeah, definitely. Hold on.
So this one we've already seen. Oh, okay. Sorry.
No, this is a different one. Actually, I'm on the button with 8-6 off, and it's full table. And the cutoff raises. Actually, in this spot, this is more read based three bet. Actually, he's pretty tight. This guy, I've got him running at 19-12, 1.2 aggression factor. Now he doesn't. He only steals something like 15% of the time, and ordinarily I think I'd be throwing away my 8-6 off. Well, the vast majority of the time anyway. But this time, I'd actually about a few minutes earlier, I'd lost a pretty big pot versus this guy when I three bet aces on a deep table and had to make a tough fold after double barreling on the turn. And I felt like his idea, well, my image versus this guy is that I'm pretty aggressive and that, being out
Yeah, I
position
agree.
versus me would be, I don't know, a pretty ugly spot and a three bet pot. So I decided to
Right.
three bet. I decided to three bet because I thought
How
I'd get a
often
lot
does
of
he fold
respect
to
for
three
from
bets?
him, especially considering the hand we just played. Uh,
Oh, okay.
um, I honestly didn't have enough hands on the guy to be able to say, but his attempt to steal was, yeah, his attempt to steal wasn't that high. I just felt like it was
That's
more a
good.
feel thing. I just felt like he would give me credit this time because of the hand we
Very
just
good.
played, and uh, and he did, so that was good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I think
Definitely, definitely.
ordinarily I'd fold that, but at the time it just felt like the right thing to do. Uh, um, okay, and finally just a standard one. Oh, sorry. There it is. Okay, so I'm on the button with ace queen off and standard cutoff open. Well, actually, it's a bit smaller than pot. This guy SSIPAKK. He seems like a regular and he
Wow.
runs. He's pretty he's semi lag
I would
as
say
well. He's
that's
like
very lagged.
30-25. Um, pretty aggressive pre-flop and actually, yeah, and he turns into a massive calling station post-flop. His aggression factor is only 1, and he's super aggressive pre-flop. So it's kind of a
Right.
blend of styles there in this one guy. Anyway, so he steals 42% of the time, and I'm clearly ahead of his range here with ace queen, and I want to build a pot versus a player who I think is pretty weak post flop. And I feel like if I hit top pair after three
Sure.
betting, then I want to try and get three streets of value from this guy. So I just
Very
three
good.
bet for value, and he folded. So
Okay. Um,
that was it.
so,
That was
yeah,
six hands.
it's a good
Good go.
mixture. I hope this allowed you to just look for some spots that you might have normally just either folded or called, and just to kind of see. So from what it seems like, it was a pretty positive experience in that a lot of people gave you a lot more credit than you deserved. And I really do think that as you pick your spots, you will um, your image will continue becoming more and more aggressive, and you're just going to get paid off on your better hands. So, do you have any other comments, I guess, or questions before we move on to our next segment?
Honestly, I mean, the exercise put me a bit out of my comfort zone. I usually don't 3-bet as much as 9%, and I at times definitely felt like you know, that I was kind of overstretching or overreaching a little bit, especially given my experience. Uh, but it turned out to be, yeah, very interesting,
Okay,
and
cool.
you know,
Well,
made it
let's
quite a
move
lot of
on
fun
to
as well. So I really
the
did enjoy
pre-flop
it. I
or
learned a lot as well.
playing pre-flop, but out of position. So here you had one hand out of position, but for the most part, all your other hands were in position, and that makes a huge difference. So now we're going to talk about some out of position stuff when you're playing out of the
Mm.
blinds. So the number one rule of out of position play is pretty much to stay tight, and I feel like that's the thing that a lot of micro and low limit players have trouble with. So by default, you should be 3-betting your the top of your range, ace king, queens through aces, to most raisers when you are out of position. And you should be flat calling with pocket pairs between 2s and 7s in multi-way pots. And there's times when you should be calling like 2s to early position raiser because your implied odds are really good there. We'll talk about that later. But usually, if somebody's raising from like the button, you have pocket 2s, you should probably be folding them. Now, the rest of your hands, and those are kind of like the borderline hands, like 8s through jacks, ace queen, and king queen suited, should be very situational, and we will address those a little bit later on. But that's a good general rule. Notice I didn't include any like suited aces, suited connectors, or suited one gappers. Those hands are you should be avoiding them in re-raised pots or like in a lot of raised pots when you're going to be out of position, just because they're going to be so hard to play. So let's talk about next what to do when you're in the small blind and you have a bunch of limpers, and what to limp along. So the range we came up with is it's pretty wide, and it includes all pocket pairs lower than 8s. I think with 9s and up, if you have one or more limpers, you should be raising it to protect because you want to fold out hands like 10-6 suited. You know, if somebody flops a 10, then it's just going to be hard to play. So raise hands like 9s through aces because they have the most equity preflop. But complete with a really wide range. So I would say any kind of suited ace all the way up to ace jack suited, just complete with. Uh, a lot of the suited kings are going to be okay to complete with as well, because if you hit like a flush, or if you hit a flush draw, then it's usually going to be more often than not, there's going to be people playing a lot junkier flush draws, so you're going to get value out of that. If you hit trips, you're going to have trips with a very good kicker if it's not the king, um, and just a bunch of like mid to low suited connectors and one gappers, along with some offsuit broadways. I think this is going to be a profitable range to be completing in the small blind. Andrew, Andrew, of course, is joining us in this episode. Do you have any comments or questions or anything to add about this range in the small blind?
I don't actually know. I was interested though, just before on the previous slide, if you wouldn't mind. Just that I wanted to hear what you had to say about why calling with lower pocket pairs heads up might not be profitable.
Okay, yeah.
Why that would be yeah. Okay.
I will definitely address that a little bit later on in the episode.
Oh, okay, that's fine.
So keep that question in mind. Good question.
Cool.
I have been playing a little bit of 25 NL recently. So here's a hand that I played where I have Ace Queen suited, and this is going to be a very standard hand, but basically there are 3 limpers pre-flop, and the small blind folds. Now here, once you have 3 limpers, I feel like you can really complete with a, well, actually, you should probably just stick to this range because this is the range that's going to be profitable for you. But I have Ace Queen off. I have Ace Queen suited, and that falls in our range of hands that we should be at this point raising to thin some of this field and raise for value because a lot of dominated queens and a lot of dominated aces are going to tag along. So I make it $1.50, which is 6 BBs, and get 3 callers. So I flop top pair, top kicker on a pretty draw-heavy board. Now, I'm going to continuation bet, and I'm going to probably fold if I'm faced with resistance. Depends how much resistance I'm faced with, but I'm going to bet 425. I think people are going to play me pretty honestly. Like, if I'm min-raised, I'm probably going to call on this flop because people could still min-raise a hand like King-Queen or Queen-Jack. But for the most part, I expect them to call me with draws, call me with, like, worse pairs or worse kickers, and not go crazy unless they have, like, a set of 4s or a set of 2s, which is very likely. But, of course, this guy I'm pot committed against because I have him already covered. But everybody folds and I take it down. So it's a pretty standard hand. But my range for raising out of the blind is going to be pretty tight. It is going to be that 9s through aces. King Queen suited, I probably still would raise out of the blinds to thin the field, and definitely Ace Queen suited, Ace King suited, Ace King offsuit, and Ace King or Ace Queen offsuit. So it's a pretty standard hand. All right.
I was just wondering quickly, what kind of stack size would you consider to be, in that example you gave? I mean, obviously you were really deep versus Jojo the Frog and Fuzz QC.
Yeah.
You're clearly pot committed versus Tina, so that doesn't really matter. But at what point do you think you draw the line between going with the hand versus a raise? At what point does a person's stack size become inhibiting?
So I think if anybody at this point has like $15 left in their stack, which would be 3/5, like 60 BBs, I'm gonna go all in against them. If anybody has more than 60 BBs, I'm probably gonna give them a lot more respect.
Okay.
So like,
cool.
If somebody has $15 and they re-raise me all in, I'm gonna go with it. If somebody has, like, I would say 17 or more, then I'm just not gonna like it anymore.
Right.
Obviously, when the deeper we are, the trickier it is. And the thing is, like, even if somebody flat calls, I'm just not loving my hand at this point because we're really deep. I'm probably definitely going to be betting the turn, but it's just really tough to play out of position, which is kind of like the point of this video. But it's a good question about stack sizes.
Okay.
Yeah, basically anytime they can come over with less than 3x on you, I'm probably going to be going with top pair, top kicker. Anytime they come over the top with like more than 3x, just makes it a lot more tough.
Yeah.
All right, so the next part is, so when you're faced with an early position raiser who, that just as a reminder is under the gun and under the gun +1, also known as middle position, who seems pretty decent and everybody else is folded, I would be 3-betting with queens through aces and ace king I would probably flat call with my low pocket pairs, 2s through 6s, and look to do that for set value. And the reason I would flat call with 2s through 6s is any kind of reasonable early position raiser is going to have a pretty tight range. And that range includes a lot of potential overpairs. So when we do hit a set, we actually have the odds to get paid off. Now, I'm assuming like 100 BB stacks. If somebody's sitting on, $5 at a 25 NL game and they're raising early position, I'm just dumping a lot of my middle pocket pair or like low pocket pairs. On the other hand, 7s through 10s, I'm going to be calling not just for set value. I'm going to be calling to play some post flop. Jacks are really read dependent. I think by default I'm going to be calling. Against some players, I'm going to be 3-betting for value. And for the most part, I'm going to be flat calling with ace-queen offsuit. Ace-queen offsuit or ace-queen suited for that matter. So here's another example of a hand that I actually played this morning, where I don't know anything about this player, but they raise under the gun. So I think 3-betting here is horrible. I think folding is kind of weak at this point. So I'm going to flat call. And I get a pretty low flop. So on one hand, it's a good flop for me, but it's not a hand that I want to go crazy on. So I'm going to check, he's going to bet, and I'm going to call. Now, the turn is an 8. So I could lead this, but I expect him to play pretty honestly. So I think he's going to be betting his overpairs again, and anything that he has a set with, he's going to be betting, of course, again. And I also expect him to barrel with hands like ace-king of diamonds, ace-queen of diamonds, hands that have just a lot of equity. So I'm going to check to him. When he fires again, my equity in the hand drops dramatically. So there's very, very, very few hands that at this point I'm ahead of, and this is just given an unknown. And this is a very bad board for him to be double barreling on without an overpair or better. Just because this is the kind of board that he should expect to get check raised a lot on the turn by somebody who slow played a set on the flop or potentially turned a set. So when he's barreling here again, my 9s are hardly ever good, and I think trying to call him down is just going to get very expensive, and it's not going to be profitable. So at this point, I just elect to fold, and I'm content with the way I played the hand. So, but I probably would have played, 8s through jacks similarly. With jacks, I probably would have still called his turn bet because he could be value betting 9s or 10s. But with 9s, I just can't continue past the turn. So that's that hand. And that's how I deal with an early position raiser. On the other hand, if this player raised the button, I might have 3-bet him, or if I flat called, I probably would have flatted the turn as well, because there his range would include a lot more like lower pairs like ace-8 or just a lot more like pairs that you could be value betting. But because he raised from early position, his range is a lot tighter. Until I know otherwise. All right, so Andrew, do you have any questions or comments before we move on to the next slide?
I think that's maybe a spot where I had some trouble with, just because instead of, especially considering that that the guy is under the gun, I would automatically, think to myself that the guy's not a very good player, without a read. I'd still just make that assumption and just overplay my hand and cost myself money. Especially when you look at it, that the turn brings the 8, if he was barreling, on the flop with overcards, with overpairs, sorry, to the board, then the only one that you were dominating on that flop just turned a set. So
Exactly.
there's
Yeah,
just
the A was a
there's
very bad
nothing he
card
can
for
be.
us.
Well, yeah, there's just nothing he can be betting there that your equity is very good versus except a total bluff, and you should be giving people more credit than that under the gun. So it was a yeah, it's it's a really pertinent example to me anyway.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I mean, it seems like a pretty standard hand, and I feel like a lot of the things that we're going to be going over uh, are are pretty standard, basic poker, which a lot of people just have. It's not that they don't understand it. It's like when they're playing, they're unable to apply it. It's kind of a, I don't know. It's kind of interesting, but
I think it's just autopiloting. I think people just, well, I know I'm definitely guilty of that. Just going on
right.
autopilot instead of just thinking things through as much as I should.
Now things change a little bit when somebody is stealing, and a steal is what we would define as an open raise from the cutoff or the button. So now people are raising from late position. So when decent players are raising from late position, their range increases dramatically. So there, I would re-raise with hands like ace-queen and tens through aces and ace-king. And I'm going to talk a little bit about flatting with hands like ace-jack and king-queen to somebody's like button raise. I would probably still be folding hands like ace-jack to somebody's cutoff raise, but to a decent player's button raise, we're going to talk about that in a minute, like flatting with hands like ace-jack and king-queen. If somebody's stealing a high percentage, like above 30, then I would actually be folding my 2s through 6s, my low pocket pairs, unless you're in the small blind and the big blind's really, really bad. So if the big blind's really bad, then flatting there and having another player flat is going to be profitable, because you're going to create a multi-way pot and you're going to be in good shape if you hit your set. And people tend to not like continuation bet. People continuation bet a lot less in like 3 or 4 way pots. So there, your 2s through 6s, you just have much better implied odds. On the other hand, I would be flatting with hands like 7s through 9s because they have a lot more showdown value. So, and this is kind of the key point, and I should probably highlight it. Here we go. So, you should fold a lot of speculative hands like suited connectors, Broadway cards, and suited aces. You could 3-way them sometimes if somebody's really getting out of hand with their stealing, but for the most part, I just don't think anybody will criticize you for folding a lot out of the blinds. Yeah, there's sometimes good spots to like 3-bet because somebody's getting out of line, but for the most part, if you stick to this range that we mentioned above, you're going to be in good shape. All right, so now let's address the situation right here of flat calling hands like ace-jack, suited, and king-queen. So if you have a player who's raising a lot, like 30%, who's dealing with 30% of their range, then if we flat call out of the blinds with hands like ace-jack suited, ace-jack offsuit, king-queen offsuit, king-queen suited, and king-jack suited, then it's going to dominate a lot of their raising range. Now, this is not just their raising range. This is their raising range that we have dominated. So they're raising like a lot of hands, and these hands include like pretty much like all aces, lots of kings, lots of queens, lots of tens. So the range that we have is just going to be crushing that. Along with, they're going to be raising a lot of hands like 6-7 suited, queen 7 suited. Now, um, there's kind of a caveat to that. So 1 second. So the big question is that going to be profitable? Well, by um, by flat calling, like we could certainly fold it, and I think folding is not bad. But if we were to 3-bet it, we should be 3-betting with a polarized range. So these kind of hands don't fall in our polarized range 3-betting. So if we were to 3-bet, we expect them to fold all these kind of hands and flat call us with like pocket pairs and suited connectors and things like that. And then we just have really no idea of where we are on the flop. Whereas if we flat call and we get something like an ace jack, like we flat call with an ace jack, then we're going to keep hands like jack 10 suited, jack 9 suited, jack 8 suited, jack 10 offsuit. They might even be raising with like jack 9 offsuit. All these hands are going to stay in the pot, and we're going to be able to get value out of those hands. We're going to talk about getting value out of those hands a little bit later when we talk about post-flop play, but basically yeah, so here I say, on the other hand, by 3-betting, we fold out all those hands, but keep hands like ace-queen and ace-king off. So by flatting, we're keeping a lot of worse hands in, but by 3-betting, usually only hands that have us dominated are going to continue. So we definitely want to proceed with caution post-flop and not go crazy when we flop a pair, but there's still a lot of value in calling, and this is really important, to a liberal late position stealer. So somebody who's stealing like, 35% or more, there's going to be a lot of value of flatting there with that raise I just mentioned earlier. So, Andrew, do you have any questions or comments on this? And this is something that I think we'll just have to look at some examples later on to really apply this.
Definitely, I do think that the idea though of the reverse implied odds that pertain to 3-betting ace jack, the hands you just mentioned that we'll be flat calling with for value, it's a really important idea, because yeah, you're only going to be dominated so often when you get called, when you do 3-bet those hands. And I don't know, the same idea of implied odds applies before when you were saying how you wouldn't be calling with small pocket pairs to a late position raise, simply because a person's range, as we've just seen, is so wide that even when you do eventually hit, you're just not going to be getting paid off enough,
right?
Given the amount of times you're just going to have to check fold on the flop when you miss.
So a hand like ace jack offsuit actually has a lot more value to a late position raiser than a hand like pocket deuces. Of course, you could potentially win a much bigger pot with a hand like pocket deuces, but I think you're going to win a lot more smaller to medium-sized pot with a hand like ace jack offsuit, and it's just going to add up. Yeah, so. Now, the big thing is if somebody raises an early position, and this is a situation that we find ourselves in the most, and let's say there's an overcall or two. So should we call or squeeze? And I said, as a general rule, don't squeeze light too often at the micros. Definitely look for opportunities just so that you can start thinking about squeezing and becoming a better squeezer. But as a normal or as a norm, if it's anything but a perfect spot, just let it go. So don't look to squeeze light, but definitely squeeze with hands like jacks through aces. I'd be looking to squeeze in a lot of multi-way pots. Ace king, even ace queen suited, I would sometimes be squeezing with. Just because there's a lot more dead money in the pot. And then you can squeeze sometimes with hands like 6-7 suited and 9-10 suited, which are kind of part of that polarized range. So, yeah. Uh, cold calling with ace queen suited would be okay as well sometimes, but yeah, for the most part, this is an okay range to be three betting as a squeeze. Now, yeah, so this is like three betting for value, and then here three betting kind of like with a polarized range. I would also cold call with pocket pairs between twos and tens, and a lot of people will like squeeze with nines through tens and just really have no idea what to do post flop and get themselves into a lot of trouble. I think nines and tens still have plenty of equity on a lot of pots in multi-way pots. So I think flat calling with them is going to be okay. We're going to be flat calling with twos through, I would say twos through sixes, sometimes sevens, sometimes eights, usually just for set value. And pocket pairs are really easy to play. Like low and kind of low medium pocket pairs are really easy to play out of position in multi-way pots because you either hit a set and you continue or you don't and you're usually done with the hand. So that's a general rule for playing out of position. If like a lot of people call, then like if there's an early position raiser and like four other people call, then you can definitely increase your range to some suited connectors and things like that. But as a norm, you should not be flatting with suited connectors to like an early position raiser, and then like somebody opens an early position, somebody calls, and you have 9-10 suited in the small blind. You should just be folding that. It's not going to be profitable for you to play it. Questions or comments on this? This is the most common situations that we're going to be finding ourselves in. Is somebody raises from early position, and there's an overcall, and we're in the small blind or big blind. It's like, what do we do?
I find I find myself at least up until recently just being overly aggressive with hands like 9-9 and 10-10, you know, facing an overcall to an early position raiser and just three betting and then getting flat called by the early position raiser, maybe getting a fold from the overcaller, and then, you know, flopping an overpair and just going way too far with it, and the guy, you know, flipping over jacks or queens because he figures that he raised under the gun, so I have to have a big hand to be three betting from the small blind. So he's played the queens or jacks, you know, more passively, and I've just value owned myself so many times. So I think that's definitely something, I don't know, that needs to be considered. It's just playing a lot more cautiously out of position and not getting too three bet squeeze happy.
Right. And I feel like everything we kind of covered in this episode should really keep you out of trouble, out of position, as long as you don't get squeeze happy.
You just kind of want to give yourself like easy decisions post flop,
Yeah.
especially out of position.
Yeah, and this really does that, including this range stake we came up with for completing the small blind with. So
yeah,
that kind of covers the pre-flop play from the, like, this is kind of like the general pre-flop play from the blinds. Of course, as you know, we develop reads, and sometimes you're faced with like a min raise from early position, and a bunch of people call, and you have like ace two suited, and you're getting like 7-1, and you know it's fine to call there. But this is a general rule when you're faced with like a normal size raise with normal size stack sizes and things like that. This is going to be good. This is going to be good to go. What I want to do next is in the next two episodes, I'm actually gonna play 4 tables of 10 no limit, and we're gonna start talking a lot more about post flop play. So in fact, for episodes 7 and 8, I'm gonna be playing well, for the 7th one, I'm going to be playing 4 tables of 10 NL, and for, I guess for the 8th one too, I'm going to play 4 tables of 10 no limit, and then I'll have a Q&A with Andrew about that. We're going to do it in the pause replayer format. And we're going to really shift our focus on line stake post flop. So we'll do those 2 episodes after this, and after that we're going to get into more theory about post flop play, like continuation betting flops and reverse blocker bets and blocker bets and double barrels and things like that. But I feel like it's time to do some switch sessions before we hit you guys with any more theory. So, Angie, do you have any general questions or comments about things today, or things to?
I think it's really good that you mentioned just towards the end that, you know, as a default, a lot of what you know, the slides that you've produced just will set you in good stead, you know, and then you'll be able to adapt and just sort of change up how you'd play in a default situation given reads and things that you'll develop as you play. But like, just as a starting point, just yeah, seems pretty ideal. A lot of what you talked about will keep you out of trouble. So.
And you really can't go that wrong playing a pretty standard game at the micros.
Mm.
I mean, this is a game that just doesn't have, like, it doesn't have a lot of the like soul reading and things like that, but it's a game that doesn't have any glaring leaks. And so if you build on a foundation of a game without any glaring leaks, you're going to be in good shape. All right, awesome. So for card runners, this is Vernier with Andrew here, and we hope to see you guys in the next episode.